Ex-wife confronting her ex-husband. Will they fight again, or is this the end of their story? Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Sarah had never imagined she would be sitting in front of her ex-husband, Jake, again. Their relationship had ended years ago, after all the promises, all the good times, and all the pain. Today, however, was different. There was a distance between them, not just the space in the room, but the space in their hearts that had been growing for years. Sarah stared at Jake, noticing the same familiar look he used to have, quiet, distant, yet sharp. She could feel the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air. Sarah wasn't sure what to expect. Was this going to be another one of their explosive arguments, the kind they used to have so often when things were falling apart? Or had time and distance changed them both, making it possible to have a civil conversation? Jake leaned back in his chair, his eyes locking with hers. A lot had happened since they last saw each other, and the tension between them was undeniable. There was something different about him. Maybe it was the way he was sitting, more reserved now. He didn't seem like the same man who would lash out at her the moment he got upset. Sarah, he began, his voice calm but firm. We need to talk. Those words were enough to send a shiver down Sarah's spine. It was the same phrase they had used countless times before, but this time, there was no anger, no shouting. It was a statement of reality, something they had been avoiding for too long. Sarah swallowed, her mind racing. Was this really going to be the end? Would they finally lay everything to rest, or would the ghosts of their past continue to haunt them? She had no idea, but one thing was certain, this conversation, whatever direction it took, would define what came next in both of their lives. As Sarah sat across from Jake, the silence between them grew thick, almost suffocating. She had expected this moment to feel like a reunion, but instead, it felt like the calm before a storm. Jake was still the man she had once loved, but he was different now, more guarded, more distant. His eyes, once full of emotion, were now empty, like he had long since closed off any feeling he once had for her. I'm sorry, Sarah, Jake said finally, breaking the silence. For everything. I know I hurt you, and I know I didn't give you the closure you needed. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her chest. She had waited so long to hear those words, but now that they were out there, they didn't feel like enough. Jake, she began, her voice soft but firm. I've spent so much time trying to understand why things fell apart between us. Why we ended up like this. But I've realized that maybe I'll never really get those answers. Jake looked at her, his expression softening just slightly. I know, he replied. I know it's too late for a lot of things. But I want you to know that I've changed, Sarah. I've had time to think about everything, and I'm not the same person I was when we were together. Sarah didn't know what to say to that. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that he had truly changed. But another part of her, the part that had been hurt so many times before, couldn't bring herself to trust him again. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Sarah, Jake continued. But I am asking you to understand that I've grown. And I want you to be able to move on, whether that means you forgive me or not. I just want you to find peace. Sarah sat back in her chair, taking a deep breath. She had wanted so much for things to be different between them, but she was starting to realize that some things were simply beyond repair. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Jake, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But I do want peace. I want to stop carrying all this anger, all this resentment with me every day. Jake nodded slowly, as if he understood exactly how she felt. He didn't speak right away, letting her words sink in. The conversation had taken a turn she hadn't expected, and for the first time in years, she felt like they were actually having an honest exchange. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it felt real. After a long pause, Jake finally spoke again. I don't know where we go from here, Sarah. But I'm willing to try if you are. Sarah's heart fluttered, but she quickly shut it down. She had to be strong. I don't know either, she replied. But maybe this is enough for now. For a moment, the two of them sat there, no longer in conflict but not quite at peace either. The tension had shifted, but whether it had truly ended or was simply a pause in their story, Sarah couldn't say. But for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had taken a step forward, even if it was just a small one. The quiet that had settled between Sarah and Jake began to feel less like peace and more like an unresolved tension. Sarah's mind raced as she replayed everything they had just discussed. Was it possible to truly move on from everything that had happened between them? Could they both find peace, or was this conversation just a temporary pause in a never-ending cycle of hurt? Jake, sitting across from her, looked almost as if he were waiting for something, perhaps an answer, perhaps a reaction from her. Sarah couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for him. She had been angry for so long, but now, in the quiet, she could see the vulnerability that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface of their turbulent relationship. She remembered the good times, the laughter, the days when things seemed perfect. But those days were long gone, buried beneath layers of disappointment and broken promises. Jake's voice broke through her thoughts. I don't expect you to trust me right away, Sarah. I just want you to know that I'm not the same person I was. I've learned I've changed. His words felt sincere, but Sarah couldn't help but wonder if that was enough. Could she really forgive him for everything that had happened? Could they move forward, or was the damage too deep? I don't know, Jake, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can just let everything go. There's so much hurt, so many things we never said, so many things I still don't understand. Jake nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. I get it, Sarah. And I'm not asking you to forget or to erase everything. I'm asking for a chance, just one chance, for us to move forward, even if it's just as two people who can have a conversation without the past haunting us. His words hung in the air, and Sarah felt the weight of them pressing down on her. Could she really do that? Could she let go of the anger and resentment that had built up over the years? Or was she holding on to those feelings because they were all she had left? Sarah took a deep breath and looked at Jake, really looked at him. This was the man she had once married, the man she had shared a life with. And even though they had changed, even though so much had been broken, there was still a part of her that wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could start over. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said quietly, but I am willing to try. I can't promise anything, but I want to see where this goes. A small smile tugged at the corner of Jake's lips, but he didn't speak. Instead, he reached across the table and gently took her hand in his. It was a simple gesture, but for Sarah, it felt like the first step toward healing. They weren't there yet, but maybe, just maybe, they could get there. The road ahead would be difficult, but Sarah was beginning to understand that maybe the only way forward was through this uncertain, fragile moment they were sharing now. As Sarah and Jake sat there, the room seemed to shrink around them, as if the walls were closing in on all the things they had left unsaid. The weight of their shared past was still there, lingering like a shadow, but there was something new too, something unfamiliar. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt the faintest spark of hope. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Jake, too, seemed to sense it. The way he was sitting now, more relaxed, less guarded than before, told her that. Maybe he was starting to believe it too. There was no grand gesture, no sudden promise that everything would be fixed. Instead, it was a quiet understanding, a mutual acknowledgement that both of them were here, at this moment, willing to try. I'm still scared, Jake, Sarah admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how to let go of everything. Jake's expression softened, his hand still holding hers, and he gave a small nod. I know. I'm scared too. I'm not asking you to fix everything today. I'm not asking for some miracle. I just want us to move forward, even if it's one small step at a time. Sarah nodded, looking down at their joined hands. There was a sense of comfort in that touch, a reassurance that maybe, just maybe, they could start over, not as husband and wife, but as two people who had once shared a life and were now trying to understand each other again. The conversation shifted again, from the past to the present, from the hurt they had both carried to the possibility of something new. It wasn't easy. There were moments of silence, moments where Sarah had to fight the urge to shut down, to retreat into the comfort of anger. But she didn't. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to be vulnerable. She listened to Jake, really listened, without the noise of resentment clouding her thoughts. Jake, for his part, seemed to be doing the same. He spoke of his regrets, not as excuses, but as part of his journey. "I didn't always know how to be the person you needed me to be," he confessed. "And I'm sorry for that. But I'm trying to be better. For myself, and maybe for you too." Sarah could hear the sincerity in his voice. It wasn't the usual apology that came with a promise of change that never lasted. This felt different, more genuine, more real. She wasn't sure if she believed it completely, but for the first time in a long time, she was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. "I don't expect things to be perfect, Jake," Sarah said slowly. "I don't expect some grand romantic gesture. I just want to know that we're not stuck in the past anymore. That we can be two people who are okay with where we are, even if we're not where we used to be." Jake nodded again, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "That's all I want too, Sarah. To be okay. Whatever that looks like for us." There was still a long way to go. There were still a lot of things that needed to be worked out. But for the first time, Sarah felt like they were on the right path, however uncertain it might be. They didn't have all the answers, but they were willing to find them together, one step at a time. As Sarah and Jake continued their conversation, the awkwardness between them started to fade. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Sarah felt the old defenses creeping up, moments when she wanted to shut down and protect herself from getting hurt again. But every time she felt that urge, she pushed it aside. She had spent so much of her life holding on to the past, holding on to pain, that she realized now it was time to let it go. Jake seemed to sense it too. He wasn't rushing things. He wasn't pushing her to forgive him or forget what had happened. Instead, he was giving her the space to take things at her own pace. And for the first time, Sarah appreciated that. She had always been the one who tried to fix everything, the one who took on the weight of their problems, but now, she felt a shift. Jake was showing up in a way he never had before, not with empty promises, but with patience, with understanding. "Do you ever think about what could have been, Sarah?" Jake asked quietly, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. Sarah thought for a moment. It was a question she had asked herself countless times. What if things had been different? What if they had communicated better, worked through their issues instead of running away from them? She had imagined 1,000 different versions of their story, 1,000 ways it could have ended differently. "I do," she said slowly, her voice thoughtful. "But I also know that we can't change the past. We can only move forward. And right now, that's all I want. To move forward." Jake looked at her, his expression softening. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, his voice sincere. "Because that's all I want too. No more looking back, no more regrets. Just trying to figure out where we go from here." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that neither of them had expected. For the first time, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't a promise of a perfect future, but it was a chance to rebuild something, even if it wasn't what it once was. They didn't have to have all the answers. They didn't have to fix everything overnight. They just had to be willing to try, and for now, that was enough. The conversation drifted to more neutral topics. What had happened in their lives since they had parted ways, the small things they had missed about each other, the things they had learned along the way. It felt easy, surprisingly so. Sarah hadn't expected it to feel this natural to talk to Jake again, but as they spoke, she realized that maybe this was the first real conversation they had had in years. Not filled with anger or bitterness, but with understanding, with vulnerability. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. As the evening went on, Sarah felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't a sudden fix, but it was a start. For the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward for both of them. Not as they were before, but as they were now. Different, changed, but still willing to try. As the days passed, Sarah found herself thinking more and more about what Jake had said. They had both agreed to try, to move forward, but the weight of everything that had happened still lingered in the back of her mind. The idea of letting go of the past, of moving forward without constantly looking over her shoulder, was both freeing and terrifying. Sarah hadn't realized how much of her life had been consumed by anger and resentment until now. It wasn't something she had chosen, but something that had become a part of her, like a second skin she wore without even thinking about it. And now, as she started to slowly peel it away, she felt exposed, vulnerable. But Jake was still there. He wasn't rushing her, he wasn't demanding anything. He was simply there, showing up in ways he never had before, and that made all the difference. Sarah wasn't sure what the future held for them, but she knew one thing for certain. They were both willing to put in the effort, even if it meant taking small steps. One afternoon, they decided to meet for coffee, something they hadn't done in years. It wasn't a date, it wasn't some grand gesture, but it felt like a new beginning. The coffee shop was small, cozy, with soft lighting and the quiet hum of background chatter. As Sarah sat across from Jake, she felt the familiar nervousness in her stomach, but this time it wasn't filled with dread. It was different, more hopeful. They talked about their lives, their jobs, their families. The conversation was easy, like they had picked up right where they left off, except now there was a sense of maturity and understanding that hadn't been there before. "It's strange, isn't it?" Jake said after a moment of silence. "How we can go so long without really talking, and then when we finally do, it feels like we never stopped." Sarah smiled, nodding. "Yeah, it's like we just needed the time to figure things out. For both of us." Jake's eyes softened as he looked at her. "I never wanted to hurt you, Sarah. I know I did, and I can't take that back. But I'm trying to be better now. I'm trying to be someone you can at least trust again." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. It wasn't easy to hear, but it was the truth. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could believe it. "I'm trying too," she replied quietly. "I'm trying to let go of the past, and not let it control me anymore. But it's hard." Jake reached across the table, gently touching her hand. "I know. I get it. But we don't have to rush. We can take it one day at a time." For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a sense of calm. They didn't have all the answers, but maybe that was okay. They didn't need to know everything right now. What mattered was that they were both willing to try, to show up for each other in ways they never had before. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. And that was enough for Sarah, for now. The following weeks brought a sense of newness that Sarah hadn't expected. She had started to trust Jake again, little by little, but she still held a part of herself back, unsure of how deep the change truly ran. Still, something had shifted between them. There were no promises of forever, no guarantees of how things would end up, but Sarah felt that, for the first time in a long time, she could breathe. Jake, too, seemed different. He wasn't the man he had been when they first met, and certainly not the one who had caused her so much heartache. He had grown, just as he had said, and Sarah could see that. She noticed the small gestures, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he gave her space when she needed it, the way he never pushed her for more than she was willing to give. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that felt like progress. One evening, after work, Jake suggested they go for a walk in the park, something they used to do when they were together. Sarah hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready to revisit those old memories, but then she agreed. It wasn't about trying to go back to what they once had. It was about being present in the moment, and seeing if they could create something new. As they walked, the conversation flowed easily. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, things they had never shared before. It wasn't about the past, but about the people they were now, the people they were becoming. Jake looked at Sarah, his expression soft and open. I know it's not easy, he said, his voice quiet, but I'm really glad we're doing this. I know it's small, but it feels like something. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling just a little. Yeah, me too, she replied. It's not easy, but maybe it's enough for now. They walked in silence for a moment, the sounds of the park surrounding them, the rustle of leaves, the distant chatter of other park-goers, the occasional bark of a dog. It felt peaceful, calming. For the first time in years, Sarah didn't feel like she was constantly on edge, waiting for the next argument or disappointment. She felt a sense of acceptance, of understanding, that she hadn't realized she was missing. As they neared the end of the path, Jake stopped and turned to face her. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away, Sarah, he said softly. And I'm not asking for anything to be perfect. I just want you to know that I'm here. For you. No matter what. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had heard those words before, but now they felt different. They weren't just empty words. They were real, filled with sincerity. She nodded, her voice thick with emotion. I know, she said, her gaze meeting his. And I'm here too. It wasn't the grand resolution she had once imagined, but it was something. It was progress. And for Sarah, that was enough. For now, she didn't need to have all the answers. She just needed to know that they were both trying, and that was enough to keep moving forward, together, one small step at a time. As Sarah and Jake continued to spend more time together, their connection deepened in ways neither of them had expected. The small moments, like sharing a cup of coffee or taking a walk, began to build a sense of normalcy between them, one that had been absent for so long. Sarah still felt cautious, but she also recognized that things were changing, not in huge, dramatic ways, but in small, meaningful steps. One evening, they decided to meet for dinner at a local restaurant, a casual outing that was, in a way, a new chapter. As they sat across from each other, the familiar hum of conversation and clinking silverware filled the space around them, but it felt different this time. There was a sense of comfort in their silence, a quiet understanding that hadn't existed before. It's funny, Jake said, breaking the quiet, how much time can change things. I never thought we'd be here, having dinner, just talking. Sarah looked at him, her heart a little heavier than before. Yeah, me either. It's strange how things turn out, isn't it? She replied, her voice soft. We spend so much time trying to make things work, and then it all falls apart. But I guess that's just part of life. Jake nodded, taking a sip of his drink. Yeah, I guess so. But I think we're learning how to make it work again, just in a different way. Sarah smiled, though it was a bittersweet smile. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something worth fighting for here. Maybe, she said quietly. Maybe we're starting to figure it out. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, what they had been up to lately, the things they enjoyed, the small joys that filled their days. It wasn't anything earth-shattering, but in those moments, Sarah realized that she was actually enjoying herself. She wasn't worried about the past or what the future might hold. For the first time in a long time, she was just present. After dinner, they took a walk along the nearby street, the cool evening air a welcome contrast to the warmth of the restaurant. Jake walked beside her, not saying much, but there was something in the quiet that made Sarah feel at peace. She had always been afraid of what might happen if they tried to reconnect, but now she was beginning to see that it didn't have to be perfect. They didn't need to rush back to what they once had. They just needed to be honest, to take things one day at a time. And for Sarah, that was enough. She didn't have all the answers. She wasn't sure if they would end up together in the long run. But in this moment, as they walked side by side, she felt hopeful. Hopeful that they could build something new, something different. Hopeful that, in time, they could find a way forward together. It wasn't about trying to fix the past. It was about learning from it, and moving forward with the knowledge they had gained. And that, for now, was all that mattered. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah began to feel a sense of calm that she hadn't realized she was missing. Her time with Jake was no longer just about rehashing the past or trying to fix what had gone wrong. It was about understanding who they were now and where they could go from here. They still didn't have all the answers, but that was okay. They were learning to be present, to enjoy the small moments that made up a day. One evening, as they sat on the porch of Sarah's apartment, sipping their drinks in the fading light of sunset, Sarah felt a peace settle in her chest. She had spent so much of her life feeling like she was waiting for something, a sign, a moment, an answer that would give her the certainty she had always craved. But now, with Jake beside her, she realized that maybe life wasn't about waiting for everything to fall into place. It was about finding contentment in the uncertainty. You know, Sarah said, breaking the silence, I used to think that we had to have everything figured out. That if we didn't have a plan, we were failing. Jake looked at her, his expression thoughtful. I get that. I used to think the same way. But maybe the point isn't to have it all figured out. Maybe the point is just to keep moving forward, no matter how slowly. Sarah smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. I think you're right. I've spent so much time trying to control everything, but maybe it's time to just let things unfold. Jake nodded, his eyes soft. It's not easy. And I know there's still a lot of work to do. But as long as we're both willing to keep trying, I think we'll get somewhere. Sarah didn't have a clear vision of what the future looked like. She wasn't sure if they would be together forever, or if they would part ways again at some point. But she knew that, for now, they were moving in the right direction. They were learning, growing, and finding their way through the mess of their past. And for the first time, that felt enough. The next few weeks brought new challenges, of course. There were moments when Sarah felt the old doubts creeping in, when she questioned whether she was making the right choice. But those moments were fewer now. She had learned to trust herself, to trust the process, and to trust that, no matter what, she was strong enough to handle whatever came her way. Jake, too, was learning. He wasn't perfect, and he knew that, but he was showing up for Sarah in ways he hadn't before. He listened more, he understood more, and he was patient with her as she navigated her own healing. Their relationship wasn't perfect, it would never be, but it was real, and that was what mattered. And so, as they continued to spend time together, building their lives one small step at a time, Sarah realized that she had found something precious. It wasn't the fairy tale romance she had once dreamed of, but it was something more valuable, a partnership built on understanding, growth, and the willingness to keep moving forward, no matter what. And in that moment she knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together.